What's up? What is going on? Arvind Ramakrishna here, and welcome back to Driven to Draw. And today I'm going to be talking about the top 3 tips to simplify your approach to drawing. So let's get started. Anyway, simplification of your drawings. Sometimes I get people have asked me before is, how do you get all that detail? How are you able to comprehend so much detail right at the start or right at the beginning? And the fact of the matter is, I do not comprehend the detail. In fact, I have no gift and no talent to drawing. Everything has been sort of developed over time. And my first tip is what I do is to break down my objects or whatever it is I'm drawing to very primitive shapes. So for this frog, I've got this poisonous dart frog here, for instance, and then when I start looking at a reference photograph, I just start to look at, what are the big forms here? If I were to break these things down to simple shapes, what I've got are just sort of egg shapes. And then when I start to look at things like the feet and the legs, my first approach is to not try to draw the feet and leg and flesh it all out. My approach is really to just draw little stick figures and just draw where I think the legs are supposed to be. Of course, just a little bit more than that. When you're drawing anything from reference, you should be sort of measuring out everything that you're doing. You shouldn't just kind of go blindly and just try to guess. So if you have a grid, for example, and you place the grid on top of your reference photograph, it sort of helps you to scale your drawing a little bit and make sure that the proportions are okay. So what I'm doing here is I've just got the basic outline of my object, which, like I said, is this poisonous frog. And all I'm doing with these objects is just sort of creating that skeletal structure. So I've got my basic shape, I got my 2 oval shapes, and then from there I've got my legs. And all I've done is just represented the legs with, just like I said before, stick figures or just sticks to kind of show how the legs are sitting. And now the second tip is to sort of flesh it all out. So now that I've got the just representations just using these basic lines, I start to look at the reference photograph and say, all right, I got my basic lines, and it's now time to start to create a little bit of volume off of these lines. So all I'm trying to do now is just to understand what those shapes are, and I'm just drawing those shapes. And this really helps you at the beginning when you're starting something, because I've got both my kids who are 7 and 10. They're that's all they do is they observe. When they're drawing stuff, they're just trying to look at details, and they just try to draw everything at once, right? Because if you don't, they just get they don't like a process. But lately I've kind of been showing them, hey, I know you're having trouble with this, and if you're having trouble, you just draw these basic shapes and forms, and that gives you a sense of scale of how big you need to make these shapes and interrelated forms that are kind of next to each other. So you may have like an eyeball that is only so large compared to the rest of the head, correct? And you just sort of explain it that way, and they start to get it. And it's no different from people who have never drawn before, is that they just need a context with which to execute. So it's really important to start from the basics, not try to go too much into the details at the beginning. And I have to tell you, when I do it this way, I really enjoy the process. You have to slow yourself down and be patient. Make sure that you're not trying to overdo things. And when you take a systematic approach like this, whether that be drawing or anything else in your life that you're working on, or even any kind of hobby, it's just really important to start from the basics. I've got some thunder here in the background. We've got a little storm here in Michigan. We're finally getting some warmer weather, and my kids are also freaking out. And if anyone's wondering, I'm using a software called Krita to do my sketching, which excellent software here. Now the third tip is, once I've sort of finished up the drawing, or I just kind of finished out the scale and just made sure that the proportions are correct, and I like to see where they're at. Now I just sort of darken my lines a little bit and sort of silhouette the drawing. And I do this with pretty much any object that I create. And this is really important for your process, because you really can't start to do any kind of rendering until your main drawing is correct. And that's really a challenge for people, because if you're dressing up, if you have a bad drawing and you render the bad drawing, it's still going to look bad. It's dressing up a pig. So you have to really tackle things from a perspective that, hey, I want to make sure that the foundation is correct before I go in and try to render the entire object. Only then do you have my permission to render. So anyway, that's what I'm doing here. So as I go through this process, I'm adding a little bit of details, and then I'm looking at the different kinds of colors and hues that this frog is associated with, and then I go back and I start to block all those things in, and then this is where you start to build form and give a three-dimensional look to your drawing. And of course, I will have to discuss that some other time. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you here next time on Driven to Draw. Have a good one, guys.